Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Today's build is a special one. It's a collaboration between me and Bryan Kohn at B.Kohn Knives. If you don't know Bryan, he's one of the guys from the Work For It podcast. I met Bryan virtually about a year ago. He's a great guy, he's been in a couple of our challenges, and I got the chance to meet him in person at Blade just recently. So Bryan has been trying to save up for a ring to marry this girl. This is Emily. So I told Bryan, let's do a collaboration. I'll make a knife up to the heat treat. He'll then finish it off, put a handle on it, and then auction it off. And all the proceeds will go to the ring. So let's get Bryan engaged. We're starting out here with a piece of twist Damascus that I had from a previous project. We're going to put this in the core, layer it with some copper, and make a really cool knife. If I recall correctly, I think this is around 70 layers, just with a simple twist. We're going to flatten this out, and then we'll take it to the rolling mill. Okay, here's the piece of twist Damascus after forging. I've taken it to the surface grinder. It had a couple little issues in it, so I ground those out. It's about an 1/8 inch thick, which is perfect. We're going to combine it with this copper, put some 15 and 20 on the outside, weld it up, and get it in the forge. So here's the billet after grinding all the edges off, and I can see the copper all nice and clean. Next thing I'm going to do is actually surface grind all this, and then I'm going to etch it, just to make sure I don't have any weld, or I have to look for any places where I need to stay away from the edge, because there might still be some weld here, because I think I see a piece right there. So I just want to make sure before I go through doing the whole profile that I make sure I get it. It's exactly 1.5 inches wide, so that's pretty good. And there's our pattern of the knife we're going to be making. So pretty big knife. All right, let's get to grinding. All right, let's see where we're at on this, and we'll check and see if we've got any mild steel on the edges. We do have a couple of spots. I can see here, here, and then quite a few spots here. So what I'm going to do is make this the handle, because the belly of the handle will be here, and then we'll just position the blade away from any of those spots. Alright, I think we got it positioned right about there. So I'll test it right before we do the final. Alright, so
I'm going to use some of this Loctite adhesive spray. A little gummy there. We're going to shorten this just a little bit so it fits. But I think that's pretty much what we want it to be.
As always, I'm using Broadback incinerator belts. Check the video description for links.
Here's the knife after I've ground the profile. I really like it. It's pretty big, but it fits really nice in the hand, and I just love the curves on it. I think it looks kind of sexy. So next thing, I'm going to take it back to the surface grinder with about a 120 belt on it and just get this nice and smooth. And then we're going to dip it in acid one more time just to make sure we still don't have any weld on the edges. So I just dipped in some ferric, and it looks really good. There's a little bit of weld here, but you can see the copper here is fine, so that's going to get ground out anyway. There's another little piece here, but again, the bevel will take that out. The important thing is there's none on the spine here, none around the handle. Ignore this part, that's just where I was holding it with the pliers. But yeah, everything else looks good. It's all dark along the edges here. So I think we have a good profile. I'm going to put some layout markers on it, some layout lines. We'll do the false edge and then a rough grind, and then we'll put some holes in our handle.
Now that the bevel's done, it's time to put the holes in the handle for the pins.
Well, there it is, folks. We got a rough grind. We got all the holes drilled, the false edge. You can see that the copper is nicely centered. The core is nicely centered, and the copper's got a lot of action on it, so that's awesome. So here's the blade after heat treat, all ready to get shipped off. I did grind the sides just so I could test it on the HRC tester. It came right out at about 59, which is great. So I was ready to send this off, and I thought, you know, Bryan doesn't like to do leather sheaths, and I really want this to have a leather sheath. And I thought, since it's going to have his maker's mark on the blade, let's put my mark on the sheath. So we're going to make a sheath for this blade. So we're going to do a taco sheath like this. It's actually going to be like this. And then this is going to fold over. And then there's going to be a belt loop here. So that's what we're going to make. I don't have the handle on it, but that's fine. I'll make sure it's big enough to fit the handle. But that's what it's going to look like. All right, we've got our pattern all cut out. I also cut the welt out at the same time. Now it's time to just take some water, because you want to make sure you use water before you try to bend or fold leather. We're going to take some water, put it down the center crease so we can fold it over, and then we're also going to fold over our belt loop. That's the first thing we're going to do, is to stitch that up.
Now we're going to take some black dye and dye the inside of that belt loop because we won't be able to get at it later.
So I let that sit clamped for about an hour, so it's nice and glued solidly there, but now we need to stitch it. So we're going to use these markers just to mark out where we're going to put our holes. There. So now we're going to go to the drill press, drill these through, and then we're going to stitch it. Okay, next step is just to wet this again, because we need to fold this over and just make sure that everything meets up really close here, because we're going to be putting a line down here, and we want to make sure that we don't end up grinding some off and it looks uneven. So this is pretty good. If it's not even and you want it perfectly flat, then take it to the grinder and just grind these two, hold these and just grind these two even. In fact, I think I'm going to just go do that on the grinder. There, I forgot to turn the camera on, but that's what it looks like. I just ground those even. Now I'm going to open it up. So what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to stamp this. So before I stamp it, I always think it looks nice to have a little border. So we're going to take this tool and we're just going to run this along the edge to make a little border here. Okay, so our stitching is going to go in the very middle of that. Now we're going to put a little bit of design on it. All right, so now that I've got the line here, we're going to use that as a guideline. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my stamp in here, and I folded it over so that because you don't really want it on the curve, so I'm going to put it right there. Next thing, I like to use this stamp. I've kind of used this one a lot. And I'll just put 3 of these in here. And now I'm just going to use this guy, and I'm going to go all the way around the edge just to give it a little more flair. There we go. Now we're just going to dye it, and then we'll put the welt in. Okay, it's been a couple hours. Let's take the clamps off and take a look. Always make sure you put these pieces of leather on either side, or else the clamps will dig into this. So that looks pretty good. I always put the welt just up a little bit. That'll all get ground off. Okay, and that's the very next thing we're going to do, is go to the grinder, grind all this off so this is completely flat. Then we're going to run our edging tool along that to put the line where our stitching is going to go. So now we're just going to take the stitch marking tool, which is going to cut a groove, and we're going to start here. You want to try to do this in one motion. There, and just like before, we're going to use these just to put our stitch markers, mark where our stitches are going to go. And just always do this from the top, because your stitches are always going to look better from the top down. All right, let's go stitch it. Okay, just a couple more things to do. We're going to burnish the edge, which means shine it up. Before we do that, we're going to take this little tool and just kind of, take the corner off here. That'll basically help us round it over when we burnish it. There. Now we've got some 220 sandpaper, and we're just going to sand this, because this tends to kind of burn on the grinder, and if you put some of the dye on it, it just doesn't soak up here. So we're going to just take that, and you'll see the orange part will kind of turn white, and that's what we want. Let's do a little dry fit here. And that is what it's going to look like, folks.
Thanks for joining us in the first half of this collaboration video. That's how the knife turned out and the sheath. Now, go watch this video and see how it ends.